I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily, where on this edition we will be discussing the issue of our times. No, not the cost of living crisis, not the war in Ukraine, or the war in Gaza for that matter. Not the state of the health service, the education system, or the judiciary. It's not even people coming here in boats, big or small, although we may well touch upon that. Instead, the frenzy of activity from an increasingly beleaguered Conservative government would lead you to believe that dealing with people coming to this country entirely legally is top of the to-do list. He's barely been Home Secretary 5 minutes, but already James Cleverly has a 5-point plan to bring net migration down from an eye-watering 745,000 and, whisper it, keep some of his colleagues on side. Later, I'll be speaking to a senior figure in the care sector, which could be significantly affected by the changes proposed by Mr Cleverly. But first, to explain exactly what's going on here, I am flanked by our political editor, Beth Rigby, and our business correspondent, Paul Kelso. Paul, to you first. Just walk us through it. This 5-point plan, what is it and what is it designed to achieve?
This is legal migration entirely in the gift of ministers. A decision they've been free to make, unlike illegal migration. 5-point plan, broadly speaking. An increase in the minimum salary threshold you need to earn to get a skilled work visa from overseas to £38,700. That's up from £26,000, so a big increase there. Health and social care visas, should be said, are exempt from that. But if you're a health and social care worker and they account for the majority of skilled work visas in the last year, you can no longer bring dependents with you. You can't bring wives, husbands, children, partners with you. The minimum income for British citizens who want to bring a spouse or partner to the UK, largely for marriage, that's also gone up to £38,700 from £18,000. That's a huge leap that will affect some people, literally will affect whether they can afford to live with partners in the UK. There's something called the Shortage Occupation List, which identifies roles, does what it says on the tin, roles which we have struggled to fill in the UK. You can bring them in, could until these measures, at a 20% discount on the going rate. That 20% discount is going to disappear. You'll have to pay the full rate, so you can't undercut UK workers. There's going to be a new list which will still have a discount. It'll change name, but one imagines it will be shorter. And there's going to be a review of the student visa regime, which since a couple of years ago has allowed students to come in and then transition to a work visa for 2 years. That's going to be looked at. There have already been some changes to the dependence rules there, but students and education accounted for about a third of net migration.
Beth, as mentioned, all of this is within the gift, the power of ministers. The Tories, I believe, have been in power for more than a couple of years now. I mean, James Cleverly can barely know where the coffee machine is at the Home Office. He's been there at that length of time. Why is it now such a pressing issue for this government?
Look, Neil, if you look at where the government are now, you have to go back really 4 years and see what has or hasn't happened, because in the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto, the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised to get legal net migration below current levels. Now, at the time, it was about 240,000. And we all know what precipitated that Brexit election. It was the vote to leave the European Union, much of that argument based on controlling borders. And then that was the big thing from Boris Johnson, wasn't it? Take back control, get Brexit done, drive down net migration. Fast forward 4 years later, and net migration is at a record high, 745,000 people into the country on a net basis. And that gives, quite simply, the current Prime Minister an almighty headache of a Conservative manifesto promise, not just broken, but actually smashed to smithereens. And so what you're seeing now is the fallout of that, as this Prime Minister belatedly, really, as they look towards the general election, they look at what's happening in the polling, where the Conservatives are beginning to now lose votes to the Reform Party, to the right of them, if you like, tougher on migration, setting their stall on controlling migration. He's now trying to get ahead of it. So the legal migration announcement yesterday, many Conservative MPs said it should have come months ago, so you would have felt the effects of it.
Paul, here's the thing. I thought we were crying out for cheap labour in this country. I thought we were crying out for people to come and work and do the jobs that we don't want to do.
Absolutely. There's a tension here. We have record Net migration, nearly 750,000, as Beth says. That's more than a third of that is people coming to work. We also have near record vacancies, nearly 1 million jobs that can't be filled in the economy. How do we have both at the same time? It has been the one reliable lever that governments have been able to pull since the financial crisis, essentially, to try and build growth in the UK, has been to build the size of the labour force. Legal migration has always been a balance between economic priorities and political priorities. It feels like the short-term political priorities are absolutely front of mind.
What we have really is a government that talks about taking difficult long-term decisions with everything squarely aimed on the next 6 to 12 months and the prospect of a general election. And you have to see all politics now done through the prism of campaigning, if you like. And what was really interesting yesterday was that the Labour Party, did they complain about any of this? Did they raise questions about what might happen in terms of skills shortages in critical industries? No, they didn't, because they know as well that the kind of mood in the country, or what they think voters want to hear, is that migration figures are being driven down. And no one at the moment is making an economic argument for having more flowing migration into the UK. And then when you look at what's really annoying people or alarming people, it's that vision of illegal migration, the vision of the images of those small boats coming over, uncontrolled immigration, if you like. And of course, it's a much, much smaller part of the pie, but it's much more visible. So on both fronts, really, there is an impression that the government has let immigration, be that legally or illegally, run out of control. And I'm afraid that the economic arguments have fallen to the wayside as there's been a more political debate about controlling borders after Brexit and what was the Brexit vote for.
I mean, Paul, you and I were discussing before we started recording, the Home Office has confirmed that, you know, the 38,000 threshold to bringing a spouse here from overseas is not a joint income. It's not a total of the two of you together. Now, £38,000, where does that place you in in terms of earnings in this country?
This salary threshold puts you at the 74th percentile. So you are almost in the top quarter of earners in the UK, which says something about the level of pay in the UK and the distortion towards the lower end.
But also presumably something about the Conservatives' list of priorities when it comes to you being able to marry who you love.
Indeed, and here you have a policy. Now, there was a threshold before, which was £18,000, so this is a big jump. It's more than double, and the principle that if you are a UK citizen and you want to bring a foreign spouse or partner to the UK, you have to be able to care for them and provide for them is well established, and we're not the only country that does it. But this leap, effectively, one way of characterising this is only the top 25% of earners can afford to marry a foreigner if they want to come here. And one has already heard, so you're effectively saying to, what are we talking, 20,000 UK citizens, you can't live here anymore if you want to be with your wife and or husband and children. That's quite something, and one wonders if that can survive as this works its way through the legislative process.
Where are the Labour Party in all of this as well? Why do politicians of practically every political hue run screaming from migration as an issue? I will admit to having had a bee in my bonnet about this for a number of years, because unless things have changed, migrants to this country are a net contributor to the economy.
The sort of idea of migrants making a net economic contribution to the economy is perhaps not in people's minds to the extent of where they feel that they can't get doctor's appointments, or they're struggling to access public services, or they're struggling to get on the housing ladder or indeed find housing, right? And that feeds into a sense in local communities that there are too many people, that your own needs can't be serviced. And I think that is a very real concern. And I think that was a real concern, going into Brexit as well, the idea that people's wages were being driven down. And sometimes those arguments weren't paid enough attention to. The other thing I would say just quickly, and Paul will pick up on this, we also have millions of economically inactive people in this country.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So if you're a government, and this is where Labour are as well, part of your efforts is instead of importing workers into the country, can you get your economically inactive workers back into the jobs market? I think, Paul, is it 3 million economically inactive people of working age at the moment?
Well, it's closer to 9 million, about 20% of the population. Beth is absolutely right. There's absolutely a live debate around how you encourage some of those. It includes all sorts of people, should be said, people who are at home caring for family, people who are of working age who've retired. There's an economic argument to make in favour of the measures that have been brought forward here. But what's striking to me is the Conservatives aren't really making it. I mean, there was a single line, really, in Cleverly's statement, James Cleverly, about the salary threshold going up. He said to encourage businesses to look to British talent first. But then he moved on. There is a case for raising that threshold so that you encourage more British people into the jobs market and you pay them better. Boris Johnson had a go at making this. Remember, higher skills, high wage economy. The problem is it takes time, it takes skills, it takes education, it takes real focus, all things that the Chancellor, to be fair, has been talking about. But it's far, far easier to do this, to raise the numbers, to leave big gaping questions about how do hospitality businesses fill those jobs? Where does the university sector get its workers from? How can we fill the health and social care gap from home? To leave those questions, it's far easier to do that than it is to build that workforce and change the shape of the economy. That's the challenge that's facing the government and leaving business frustrated at best.
If you take away all of the economic arguments, if you as a government, it's really basic, if you as a government have been elected on a take back control of our borders message, and you've promised to get legal or net migration below 250,000, and you come out the other end of that parliament and it's 750,000, then you just have not delivered.
How much of this then is a sop to the right of the Conservative Party, the wing of the party we shouldn't forget that Rishi Sunak is absolutely a part of?
I want to put it into context of how much trouble Rishi Sunak is in, not just with his party but with voters. There was polling out this week by JL Partners which suggested that the Conservatives have lost a net 520,000 votes since the start of October and Rishi Sunak's big conference speech, that he has the lowest approval ratings now of any Conservative cabinet minister, according to the ConservativeHome poll of grassroots. And it speaks to the fact of a PM that is in a terrible mess. None of his resets are working. He's under growing pressure from Conservative MPs and party members to give them something that they can try to sell on the doorstep. And you are right, Neil, that there is an extremely restive right of the party. I mean, the three different groups, that's the Common Sense group, the New Conservatives, and the ERG, the Brexiteer group, they're all convening tonight to talk about migration policy. Meanwhile, you've got the One Nation group, which is the kind of centre to left, if you like, caucus within the Conservative Party. They're all meeting and making their views known to the Prime Minister, right? And he's sitting in the middle, in number 10, holed up, trying to draw up this legislation that he knows is going to massively annoy, anger, infuriate one or other side of his party. And so of course he has a massive party management issue on this. But it's because they've gone into free fall under him. The idea was Rishi Sunak would stabilise the polls, close the gap. And the polling is just as bad, I think, at the moment as it was under Liz Truss.
There's an element of risk here, and it's an experiment. And I'm pretty sure there won't be an impact analysis or a great deal of, judging by the amount of detail we've been able to get in the last 24 hours, not sure how much planning has gone into this. So the big experiment here around another thing people care a lot about, the voters appear to, NHS and social care, because you're saying the health and social care workforce can now no longer bring partners, dependents with them. If you're really going to solve that, you need to hire UK workers, you need to pay them more, you've got to get the money from somewhere. That takes us straight to an almost as tricky problem, which is how you pay for social care. So none of this is easy. The idea there isn't an impact potentially on public services as a result of this is a fiction.
Beth, Paul, lovely to see both of you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay where you are. In just a moment, we will move on from the politics to the practicalities and examine what these changes might mean for the care sector. Back soon. It would be awfully easy to just focus on the politics of the government's immigration plan. The country certainly feels like it's marking time for an election. But there are, of course, real-world consequences which can't be ignored. No doubt many of you will have had some personal experience of the incredible work done in the care sector. I, for one, certainly hope I'll live long enough too. And there can be few unaware of the fact that social care is experiencing myriad problems, not least staffing. Nadra Ahmed is Executive Co-Chairman of the National Care Association. Nadra, currently, how difficult is it to recruit to your sector?
It's nigh on impossible. The domestic workforce will always be the preferred option. It's much easier and it's much cheaper in that the recruitment process is the recruitment process, whereas with international recruits, there are all sorts of other licenses and things that we've got to get involved with.
Can we put a figure on it? What size is the hole within the care sector?
We need a workforce of about 1.6 million, and that's ever growing because of the needs of our sector. But we have 70,000 international recruits currently in the country, but we still have 152,000 vacancies. So that figure has been fairly stubborn.
As you've alluded to, we have an ageing population. The demands on the care sector are only going to increase, I presume. So I wonder then what you make of the Home Secretary's 5-point plan.
We have been talking about this for quite some time. We were very clear about a couple of things, that this was a route that needed to be a short term, and we needed to be working on a domestic policy, which needed real clarity around how we were going to make sure that our domestic workforce could work. The plan took into account some of the things we'd said. One of them was that licence should only go to CQC registered organisations. We started to see it very early on where agencies were setting up, not registered, just setting themselves up, getting these licenses, actually abusing the system by charging people huge amounts of money to grant them a license coming across. And we were hearing horrendous stories about people paying 15,000, 30,000, borrowing money from friends and family to be able to pay these recruiters and bring them to the UK. Whereas the clear route should have been straight into the registered services where we knew that they would have a job. So it's been good to see that they have said that CQC registered organisations will be the ones that can recruit. Of course, the biggest challenge we will now face is that one about being accompanied by dependents. What it will mean is that people will start to look at other countries who don't require that. This is where I get very, very frustrated with current politicians and certainly the current government. Decisions are being made about a sector that most of them know very little about, but it is a stressful job. And not to allow people to bring in their loved ones for long periods of time. And what we're saying is you have to do that on your own. Basically, that's all there is. And you worry about your own family and friends that you've left behind as to how they're managing, who's looking after them. And I think that's just inhumane.
Just on that, the line from the government, as far as I understand it, appears to be the United Kingdom is a wonderful place. The draw of working here in this country will remain sufficient to keep people coming. I have no doubt that some still will. But from your experience and from what you've been saying, we should expect, as a result of this policy, a significant drop in the number of people coming here to work in the care sector.
Some people will maybe still come, but I think not everybody can do the job that we are asking them to do. We need people who are professional carers, and we are looking at that sort of qualification and that skill level to be supporting, and that we should expect no less. I think another thing that gets really irritating is that people think just anybody can do social care work. Yeah. There's lots of people who are unemployed. I mean, I hear this from politicians all the time. It's all these unemployed people. Well, they're not standing outside in queues outside the care home. They're not qualified to do the work. They're not willing to put in the time. Otherwise, they would be queuing up to do the job.
You've mentioned the department at the heart of this, the Department of Health and Social Care. And it was only relatively recently, of course, that the Department of Health morphed into health and social care. The phrase used at the time, parity of esteem, treating primary health care and social care on an even basis. Are we anywhere close to achieving that, do you think?
No, I mean, I've stopped using the word parity of esteem because I actually am calling out for something quite different. I think social care needs to be recognised in its own right. We do contribute huge amounts to the NHS because without us, the NHS would collapse. And the only people that are being let down in all of this is the people that we care for. We've got unmet need. We've got unpaid carers. We're relying on families and friends to deliver something which actually should be being delivered through a system that enables us to feel safe and secure for those that we care for.
Thanks, Nadra. And certainly it feels that this issue needs as much focus on the nuance as the broad brushstrokes of 5-point plans and ministerial rhetoric. For example, did you know that you're more likely to be treated by someone who's come from overseas to work in the NHS than be stuck behind them in a waiting list? Politics is the art of the possible, according to someone important whose name escapes me. Yet getting politicians from both sides of the divide to talk without emotion about immigration has proved impossible. The lack of a serious debate about the pros and, yes, the cons of mass immigration has led us to a place where any discussion of who and why we let people into this country is framed as much by electoral mathematics as what's best for the country, which is hardly a satisfactory state of affairs. That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you again soon.